I didn't choose the cream dress. Kyle did. Not white, nothing too soft or symbolic, just enough elegance to pass for dignity. I stood at the edge of the marble steps leading into Arden Estate, holding my breath as the driver opened the door. No music, no crowd, no mother to adjust my veil or tell me I looked beautiful, because this wasn't that kind of wedding. The air was warm, humid, and heavy on my skin. My palms trembled inside borrowed gloves. I hadn't slept the night before. I didn't cry either. I think my tears dried up the day my uncle handed me over like payment. 2 weeks ago, I was folding laundry at the back of a hotel for tips. Now I was being sold to a man with more power in his silence than most men have with a gun. My name is Noraya, and this is the story of how I became someone's wife, without love, without choice, and without a clue what I was walking into. The front door creaked open. A maid waved me in without a word. The hall swallowed me, crystal chandeliers, floors that reflected my face. No warmth. Kyle Arden didn't greet me. The officiant didn't ask if I was ready. No one asked anything. Kyle stood by the fireplace, dressed in a charcoal suit that looked like it had never been worn before, yet had somehow already outlived a dozen vows. His green eyes met mine briefly, unreadable, unmoved. He didn't smile, didn't blink, just lifted his wrist to check the time. The ceremony was over in minutes. I said my name, he said his. Pens scratched across paper. Champagne glasses clinked, untouched. "This isn't love," he said, sliding a gold band onto my finger. "But we can make it tolerable." I nodded, stiff, locked in place. "Keep out of my way, and I'll make sure your mother never needs another hospital bill paid in her life." That was the deal. Not vows, not a promise of forever, just conditions, a woman's life in exchange for another's survival. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking behind us. Somewhere in the walls time was passing, but everything inside me stood still. I didn't feel like a wife. I felt like an object returned to a shelf. After the signatures, we didn't toast. Kyle handed the pen back to the officiant, like a businessman finalizing a contract. He barely looked at me, yet every word that followed hit like a hammer driving nails into a coffin. "This isn't love," he said again, firmer this time, his voice even. "Don't confuse this with something it's not." I stood there, unsure what to say. My lips parted, but he was already walking toward the study. He stopped in the hallway and turned slightly. "You'll live here. You'll want for nothing, but you'll follow 3 rules." I nodded because I didn't have a voice in the matter. 1. Never ask me about my business. 2 steps closer. His shoes didn't make a sound against the polished floors. 2. Never open the east wing doors. A pause. His eyes didn't move from mine. And 3. Never touch the black file in my study. His face was unreadable. No anger, no warmth, just precision. Break any of those, and this arrangement ends, understand? "Yes," I said. My voice was small, but I made sure it didn't shake. He nodded once and walked away. The rules felt strange at first, specific, almost theatrical, but I didn't question them. Not then. Not when I was still raw from being handed over like a pawn. Not when I hadn't even unpacked my bags. I was still learning the sound of his footsteps, the way silence filled a room when he entered it. We had dinner that evening in the grand dining room. He sat at the far end of the table. 2 servants brought in the food. I lifted my fork, chewed slowly, barely tasting a thing. Kyle didn't speak. He didn't look at me. He signed a few documents and sipped from a glass of water. No warmth, no cruelty, just control. As I sat there trying to figure out how I got here, I realized something. Kyle didn't marry me because he wanted a wife. He married me to hide something, and he was willing to trade money, silence, and a woman's life to keep it buried. I wasn't chosen for love. I was selected for silence. And Kyle Arden didn't hide it. The next morning, I woke in a bed too large for one and too cold for comfort. No good morning, No welcome, just a folded note beside my breakfast tray. Stay within your bounds. It'll make this easier for both of us. That was how I knew. Whatever game this was, I wasn't a partner. I was a player placed on the board by someone else. He paid off my uncle's debt, bought my silence, and married me to keep his secret buried. That was the real reason I was here. Not to be adored, not to be protected, but to protect him from whatever truth waited behind locked doors and sealed files. At night I walked the halls of that estate, counting steps, tracing paths, memorizing doors. It didn't take long to feel the weight of what I'd been pulled into. This wasn't just about money. It was about silence, loss, control, and the price of love when it's built on secrets. And you? Have you ever felt trapped in a golden cage? One where everything sparkled on the outside but cracked under your fingertips? Where freedom came with a cost too high to name? Because that's where I lived. For months. In a place where grief echoed through marble halls, where every whisper led to a door I wasn't allowed to open. But stay with me, because what started as a transaction became something else entirely. What he tried to hide, what I was forbidden to know, would tear us open before it stitched us back together. Stay till the end, because the secret that ruined us also saved me. If you believe healing is still possible, even after betrayal, hit that like button, share this story, and don't forget to subscribe to Rich Billionaires Romance Stories. Coastal towns have a rhythm, one that never changes. Boats roll in, boats roll out. The wind carries gossip better than radios do. And people like me, we stay quiet. We survive. I was 24, working 3 jobs, burning out by the week, and clinging to every second I could get with my mother between treatments. She used to be strong, vibrant, the kind of woman who could clean a house, make a stew, and threaten a grown man with just her side eye, all before noon. But now, her strength faded more each morning. Some days she couldn't hold a cup. Other days, she forgot what month it was. Our lives shrank down to a rented duplex, a beat-up microwave, and a cluttered pillbox I refilled every Sunday night. The bills stacked higher than her hope. My name is Noraya, and back then, I didn't believe in rescue. Love stories? Not for people like us. We didn't have princes. We had overdue notices and busted water heaters. The only person who came around was my uncle Levi. He always carried the scent of cheap beer and bad decisions, the kind of man who called in favors but never paid them back. I knew not to trust him, but I also knew he was blood. He'd show up every few weeks, usually with greasy bags of food, or a story that started with "you won't believe this," and ended with me loaning him money I couldn't afford to lose. But that day was different. He barged in like a storm, sweating, pale and twitchy, didn't even knock. "You have 2 weeks," he said, standing in the living room like he owned it. I blinked. 2 weeks for what? He avoided my eyes. To get married. My hand dropped the dish towel. I stared at him like he'd grown horns. Married? It's not what you think, no? Because it sounds like you're selling me off like livestock. He winced but didn't deny it. It's a clean deal. You marry him and everything gets handled. Your mom's bills, the house, even your student loans. I felt the floor shift under me. Who is he? He handed me a manila envelope with one word stamped on it, Kyle Arden. I opened it slowly. Inside was a photo of a man in a tailored suit, staring off camera with the kind of expression that said he didn't need to explain himself to anyone. Strong jaw, cold eyes, dangerous posture, CEO, quiet. Loaded, Levi said. And he's made an offer. What kind of offer? Levi's voice turned grave. The kind that doesn't ask for love, just silence. I froze. What did you do? He didn't answer. Instead he muttered, "This is your way out." I should have kicked him out. I should have screamed. But instead, I walked down the hall, checked on my mom, watched her chest rise and fall in sleep, and knew. I didn't have a way out. Just a door, and in 2 weeks I'd be walking through it. 2 days after that conversation, Levi returned with a packet of papers. Contracts, signatures, and a check with more zeros than I'd ever seen on paper. He said it was a retainer. He wants the wedding done fast. Quiet, private, no media, no noise, he said, flipping pages. And he wants you wearing cream, not white. I stared at the check. I couldn't help it. That amount would buy a new life. It would erase every bill, every red mark. My mother could finally get her MRI. We could move out of that cracked duplex and breathe for the first time in years. Still, something about it made my stomach turn. What does he get out of this? Levi shrugged. Control, maybe. A name to balance a scandal, or maybe he just wants someone who won't ask questions. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by my mom's bed, listening to her shallow breaths, clutching the envelope to my chest. There was no fairy tale ending waiting at the altar. No slow dance. No smile across a room. But I wasn't chasing a fantasy. I was buying her life, and I'd pay with mine. The morning of the wedding, the sky was gray. Not stormy, just tired. I stood in front of the mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back. The dress was soft cream, high-necked, no lace, no frills, minimal. Just like everything else he requested. The stylist, a woman who barely made eye contact, applied light makeup and said nothing the entire time. She didn't ask if I was nervous. She didn't comment on my features. I wasn't a bride to her. I was a job. I was led to a black town car waiting outside. The driver said nothing. The ride was silent. The windows tinted so dark I couldn't see the world passing me by. For a moment I wondered if this was what it felt like to be buried alive, fully dressed, conscious and aware that this was the end of something. When we pulled up to the Arden estate, my breath caught. It wasn't a mansion, it was a fortress. Cold, massive, beautiful in the way marble statues are, perfect, untouched and emotionally blank. The entrance had columns that touched the sky. A massive door with no welcome mat, no flowers, no ribbons. Inside, I was greeted by a woman in a charcoal suit, not a planner, not a friend. Just another professional tasked with handing me over. "You'll follow me," she said, already walking. The ceremony wasn't in a ballroom or chapel. It was in a study, a large room with too many books and too little warmth. Kyle stood beside the fireplace, glancing at his watch. He didn't greet me. He didn't smile. He looked at me the way one might look at a painting they didn't ask to buy. An assessment of cost, not curiosity. The officiant cleared his throat. "We'll begin." And just like that, I became a wife. After the ceremony, Kyle didn't say a word. He handed the officiant a sealed envelope, nodded once at the woman in the charcoal suit, then turned and walked out of the room. No kiss, no vow, no "you may now." I stood there, still holding the pen I'd used to sign my life away. The silence was louder than any church bell. The assistant, Marla, I later learned, stepped beside me and gestured toward the hallway. "This way, Mrs. Arden." I flinched at the name. She didn't wait to see if I followed. She walked like someone who had places to be, and didn't care whether I kept up. Through corridor after corridor, I was led through a maze of high-ceilinged rooms filled with silence and stone. The room she brought me to wasn't a honeymoon suite, it was a guest room. Lavish, yes, king-size bed, floor-to-ceiling windows, velvet chairs, a fireplace that crackled like it had been lit just for show. But it didn't feel romantic. It felt staged. "This is your space," she said plainly. "Mr. Arden has his own quarters across the West Hall. You're not to enter unless invited." I nodded once. I didn't bother asking if the door to his room would ever open. On the dresser sat a folded stack of documents, a schedule, a list of dietary preferences, instructions for formal appearances, none scheduled yet. A line at the bottom read, "Do not enter the East Wing. Do not ask questions about company business. Do not open the file marked black." The rules were printed, not handwritten, cold, sharp, intentional. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to breathe. Over the next few days, the preparation phase became clear. Though for what, I still didn't know. 2 women came in the next morning. One was a stylist, the other was a posture coach. They spoke like I wasn't in the room. She slouches when she sits. That will need correcting. Keep the makeup natural, but define the cheekbones. Mr. Arden prefers subtlety. Keep her hair up. Makes the neckline appear longer. I wasn't asked if I agreed. I wasn't asked anything. I was being molded into what I didn't know. But every dress chosen, every shoe fitted, every strand of hair pinned was for someone else's preference. There was no honeymoon, no public dinner, no announcement. Kyle didn't appear again for 3 days. When I did see him, it was over dinner. I was seated at one end of a long oak table in a dining hall that looked like it belonged to a royal court. He entered quietly, nodded, and took his seat at the opposite end. His eyes lifted, cold, still. "You don't have to pretend, Mr. Arden." He set his fork down. "Neither do you." That was the first full sentence he said to me since the wedding, and somehow it told me everything I needed to know. That night I wandered the halls alone. I found a library, though most of the shelves looked untouched. I found a music room, locked. I found a sitting room, spotless, with plastic still covering the cushions. Every space felt suspended in time, decorated, designed, but unlived. I wondered if that's what I'd become too, something placed where it looked good, but never meant to be touched. When I returned to my room, there was a small folded note on the pillow. It wasn't signed. It read, "Don't forget who you're doing this for." I stared at it for a long time, unsure if it was a warning or a reminder. Maybe both. But that night, I cried for the first time since I arrived, not out of regret, but because I was starting to forget what freedom even felt like. Kyle Arden didn't yell. He didn't slam doors. He didn't raise a hand or his voice, but somehow the quiet that followed him into every room carried more control than noise ever could. Power wasn't something he wore. It was something he radiated. He moved like he had nothing to prove, because he didn't. Every step, every glance, every pause was calculated. Cold, measured. I started noticing his habits quickly. He rose early, always before the staff. By the time I reached the dining hall, breakfast was finished and cleared. A mug of coffee sat untouched beside a file folder at the head of the table. He read in silence. Responded to emails on a matte black tablet. Spoke rarely. If he noticed me, he never said it. But one day, I tested him. I entered the dining room 5 minutes earlier than usual, and took the seat closest to his. Not beside him, not across from him, but close enough to matter. He didn't look up. Instead, he reached for his coffee and spoke without inflection. "You prefer confrontation over caution." I stayed still. "Or maybe you're just curious," he added. "What are we, KL?" I asked. "Roommates? Contracts? Ghosts?" He closed the folder. "We are what we need to be." "No," I said. "You're what you need to be. I'm just the consequence." That made him look at me. Finally, "Is that what you think this is? Punishment?" "I think this is your version of control, and I think someone taught you that silence works better than cruelty." A long pause followed. Then he stood up. "No one taught me," he said. "I taught myself." He left the room. Later that night, I stood outside the study. The door was open. Inside, he sat alone in a leather chair, staring at the fireplace. No documents, no tablet, no alcohol, just stillness. A man who didn't know how to heal. So he built a fortress instead. The next morning, 3 envelopes appeared on the tray outside my door. No name, no seal. Inside the first was a new security badge for restricted access. The second, a card that read, "You may explore the West Wing if you wish. Stay away from the East." The third, a new medical report from my mother's hospital. Paid in full, no note, no explanation. But I understood what it was. A message. an offering, a test, and a reminder that Kyle Arden didn't operate on emotions. He operated on leverage, but what he didn't realize is, I was watching too, not for power, for cracks, for glimpses of the man beneath the steel. And whether he liked it or not, he'd started letting me see. The Arden estate was a mansion on paper, a prison in reality. I woke each day to perfect silence. My meals were delivered, my schedule managed by Marla, and my presence accounted for, but never requested. No one asked me how I felt, no one needed to. Kyle's rules didn't require emotional input, they required obedience. Rule 1, never ask about his business. It was easy to follow. He never invited conversation. Every time he left for meetings or trips, I stayed in the dark. I stopped wondering where he went, because the few times I did ask, he gave the same response. It doesn't concern you. Rule 2, never open the east wing doors. The hallway that led there was always dim, always colder than the rest of the house. I avoided it like instinct. Not out of fear, but because something in me knew that whatever was behind those doors wasn't mine to carry. Not yet. Rule 3, never touch the black file in his study. It sat on his desk like a warning sign, sleek, untouched, heavy with something unspoken. I dusted around it, never near it. But every time I passed that room, my eyes flicked toward the desk. The file never moved, and that, somehow, was worse. One evening, I walked through the courtyard garden after dinner. The sun had dipped low, and the lamps flickered one by one. I passed trimmed hedges and stone paths, and wondered how long it had been since someone walked, or simply to feel air on their face. When I returned to the dining hall, Kyle was already gone, but his plate was untouched. That happens more often now. He'd show up for meals, sit, stare, leave. He wasn't avoiding me. He wasn't even angry. He was disconnected, like a man watching his life from the outside. At night I wandered, not to disobey, but because I needed proof I still existed. That I wasn't just some well-dressed shadow trapped in marble corridors. I counted steps from my room to the library, 73. From the dining hall to the staircase, 41. From the front door to the edge of the forbidden east wing, 106. Every number memorized, every route mapped. The staff avoided eye contact. They were polite but robotic. They called me ma'am or Mrs. Arden, but never Noraya, as if using my name would make this arrangement too human. And maybe that was the point. Kyle hadn't built a home. He built a system, and now I was part of it. One night, just before I reached for my bedroom door, I saw a shadow move across the hallway behind me. Kyle. He didn't speak, didn't stop. He passed me in silence, walked to the library, and closed the door behind him. But for the first time, he left it unlocked. I didn't follow, but I noticed, and that small shift, one door unlocked, was the first real sign that something in him wasn't as tightly controlled as he wanted the world to believe. Days bled into one another. The structure of the mansion left little room for surprises. Meals were punctual, hallways stayed spotless, staff rotated shifts like clockwork. I started to crave imperfections, a crooked frame, a smudge on glass, something, anything, that reminded me I was living in a place touched by real people, not just schedules. Sometimes I left the doors slightly ajar just to feel like I made a dent in perfection. Kyle didn't comment, but I noticed his gaze lingering longer when he passed the rooms I'd rearranged. On a Wednesday, the sky cracked open and poured rain like the earth had split. I stood by the window for hours, just watching it hammer the stones in the garden. I didn't expect him to join me. "You hate this house," he said finally. I turned to him, surprised by the honesty. "I hate what it represents." He nodded once. "Me too." It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't cold either, just the truth. One morning I caught Marla replacing the bed sheets in the guest wing. I asked her how long she'd worked for Kyle. 5 years, she said, tucking a corner with mechanical precision. And before that? She paused. I worked for his father. Something passed through her eyes. A flicker, a memory she didn't share. Then she straightened and excused herself. That was the last time I tried to make small talk with the staff. Whatever history lived in these walls was buried deep and guarded tighter than the east wing. Late one night, I woke from a dream I couldn't remember and stepped into the hallway. The lights were dim, motion activated. Everything was quiet, until I heard the piano. Faint, low, a single melody repeating itself. I followed the sound to a door I hadn't noticed before, slightly ajar. Inside, Kyle sat alone, his back straight, fingers gliding slowly across ivory keys. He wasn't good, but he wasn't trying to be. He was remembering something. I didn't step inside. I stood there, hidden in the shadows, and watched. And for the first time, I didn't see the CEO. I saw a man sitting in the remnants of his own silence, a man with too many locked doors, a man who hadn't played music for anyone in years, but still knew how to find his way back to it in the dark. The first week after the wedding, I only heard Kyle's voice twice, once to confirm dinner would be served at 7, the other to tell Marla he'd be late. The house made more noise than he did. Every clock ticked in sync. The kitchen staff wore shoes that didn't squeak. The hallways had a polished shine that made footsteps echo too loud when you walked alone, which was most of the time. Meals were predictable. Breakfast was delivered on a tray and left outside my door, always at 8 a.m., the same eggs, the same tea, the same silence. Lunch was optional. Kyle never joined. Dinner was different. It happened every night in the main dining hall. One long table, 2 plates, one man at one end, one woman at the other. 20 feet of silence between us. The first night I tried to start a conversation. He looked up once and gave a brief nod, then went back to his plate. By the third night, I stopped trying. He didn't seem angry or irritated. He seemed gone. But then the notes started. The first one was folded neatly and tucked into the corner of my breakfast tray. It read, "You were right about the curtains. I replaced them. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but the next morning, there was another. There's hot cocoa in the second cabinet. Real cinnamon. On the third day, the east garden has fireflies after 9 p.m. I stared at that last one for a long time, not because of what it said, but because of what it meant. He noticed what I noticed, and even though he refused to speak to me at dinner, he was paying attention. I followed the cocoa note first. I opened the second cabinet and found a small tin tucked behind the coffee beans. Inside was a hand-labeled jar marked Ceylon. The scent made me smile before I even boiled the water. It was small, but it was something. The next night, I took my cocoa to the east garden. I hadn't planned to. I just went, and there they were. Fireflies, dozens of them, floating like soft sparks over the bushes and hedges. Quiet, steady. It had been years since I saw anything that gentle. I stood there for almost an hour, watching, wondering why he noticed the fireflies, but never asked me how I was doing. I didn't respond to his notes. I didn't want to start a game I didn't understand. But I started changing things in the house. Subtle things. I rearranged the books on the coffee table, swapped the dried centerpiece for fresh flowers, reorganized the pantry by color. Little things. And a day later I noticed them untouched, acknowledged, left as I had arranged them. That's when I realized we were speaking to each other. Without words. The silence at dinner changed after that, still quiet, but not empty. He started serving me wine before pouring his own. I began sitting 2 chairs closer than before. Sometimes he'd glance up mid-bite, just once, then return to his food. The tension between us didn't disappear, it thickened, but not in a way that hurts. It felt like the prelude to something, unsaid, building, and somehow, I didn't dread the silence anymore. If you were Naraya, would you have followed the notes? Drop a comment below and tell me. And if this story has you hooked, hit the like button and subscribe to Rich Billionaires Romance Stories so you never miss a moment. One evening, after another wordless dinner, I stood up to leave the table, but Kyle spoke. You moved the picture in the hallway." His voice stopped me mid-step. I turned slowly. "I did," I said. A pause. "I like the way it caught the light before you moved it. I like it better near the window." We stared at each other across the table, 10 feet of polished wood between us. Then he nodded once. "So do I." I sat back down. We didn't talk after that, but I stayed 10 minutes longer than usual. The next morning I found something new on my tray, a page torn from a novel. Highlighted, underlined. The words were marked in black ink. "Loneliness isn't always loud. Sometimes it just waits for you to notice." I stared at the page, then folded it gently and slipped it under my pillow. Kyle wasn't asking me to understand him. He was asking me to see him. That night I left a book, one I'd finished, on the library armchair where he often sat. I didn't leave a note, didn't write a message, but the next day the book was gone, and in its place sat a new one. The next time I saw Kyle, it wasn't over dinner or in the hallway. It was just before midnight, in the library. I hadn't expected him there. I needed somewhere quiet to breathe, somewhere not so clean, not so stiff. He sat in a dark leather chair, one leg crossed, reading by the dim light of the lamp. His blazer was gone, shirt sleeves rolled up. He didn't look up when I entered, but he turned a page and said, "Third shelf on the left, the poetry section." I stood still, unsure. "You don't strike me as the type who reads poetry," I said softly. "I'm not," he replied. "But you do." He didn't explain how he knew. He didn't have to. I didn't pick a book. I didn't sit. I didn't even say good night. But I left the library that night with something else. Not trust, no connection, but a thread, thin, unspoken, fragile. And it wasn't tied to duty or rules or contracts. It was tied to fireflies. And cocoa. And words not said out loud. That was the first night I realized Kyle Arden wasn't as unreachable as he wanted the world to believe. And I wasn't as invisible as I thought. The East Wing always stayed quiet. Too quiet. The lights didn't flicker on with motion. The floors, unlike the rest of the house, didn't shine. The air felt cooler along that hallway, like the sun had never touched it. Every time I passed that corridor, I felt it watching me. Not in the way you feel eyes, but in the way you feel a closed door daring you to open it. Kyle's second rule had been clear: never open the East Wing doors. So I didn't, until they opened themselves. It was just after 1 a.m., a restless night, a storm outside. I couldn't sleep. The thunder cracked low and slow, humming through the walls. I had stepped out to refill my glass of water when I noticed it. One of the double doors at the end of the East Hall, slightly ajar, just enough to invite, just enough to warn. My first thought was to turn around. I should have. But something about that half-open door, the way the darkness bled into the hallway, kept my feet rooted. This wasn't curiosity. This was instinct. I walked slowly, my slippers silent on the floor. As I approached, a draft pushed the door open wider with a soft moan. The hallway inside was dim. The air was colder, older, and lined with paintings. Each frame was different, some gold, some wooden, some ornate. But the face in every portrait was the same. A woman, maybe late 20s, soft features, sad eyes, hair curled around her collarbones, a quiet kind of beauty. But the one thing that stood out, every expression looked unfinished. As if she'd been interrupted mid-thought. I followed the hallway, counting 6 portraits before the air changed again. Another door. This one was already open. Inside I heard something faint, a melody, a music box. The room was small, delicate, pink curtains drawn to the side, a tiny bed, a blanket still smoothed as if someone had just made it. Bookshelves filled with children's stories. A ballerina figurine spun gently above a mirrored jewelry box. A single red shoe sat near the edge of a rug. Everything was untouched, like time had been stopped, preserved, a nursery, but one that hadn't been used in years. I stepped inside, slow. My hand hovered above the ballerina, drawn to its soft spin. I never touched it, because I heard the door click. I turned around, face unreadable, jaw set, hands by his sides clenched. "What are you doing here?" His voice was calm, but strained. "I couldn't sleep," I said softly. "The door was open. You weren't supposed to see this." My eyes moved around the room. "Whose is it?" He looked past me. "At the bed. My daughter." I turned back sharply. "You never said." "Because I don't," he cut in. His chest rose once, slowly. "I don't have her anymore." Silence, not awkward, not forced, just hollow. I took a careful breath. "She lived here?" He nodded once. "How old was she?" His jaw tensed. 3 years, 2 months, 14 days. The precision wasn't for me, it was for him. People forget birthdays, but they never forget their losses. Finally he said, "Don't ask me anything else tonight." He turned to go, but just before leaving the room, he stopped. "She liked red shoes," he said without turning around, "and ballerinas." Then he left. The hallway swallowed him, and I stood there, between innocence and grief, trying to remember how to breathe. I sat at the edge of my bed, eyes locked on the fire crackling low. I thought about the music box, the portraits, the untouched books, a man who never smiled, never asked questions, never touched me, but still held the ghost of a daughter in every room he walked past. He hadn't told me not to go back, but I didn't, not because I was afraid, but because some pain doesn't need witnesses. Some love, even when broken, stays sacred. The name stayed with me. Elowen. I said it to myself in silence, on walks through the garden, in the steam of my bath, in the pages of the books I couldn't focus on reading. I wondered how often Kyle said her name aloud, if ever. The next day passed like a quiet apology. The staff tiptoed, the rains softened. Kyle stayed gone. I found him sitting in the firefly garden. No music, no wine, just him and the silence he carried like skin. I stepped into the grass barefoot. He didn't look at me. "You can ask," he said quietly. I sat beside him, our shoulders inches apart. "Elowen," I whispered. "She was yours." He nodded. "She had your eyes?" He turned to me. "No. She had her mother's." A pause. "Then, but she had my temper." A ghost of a smile. The garden pulsed around us, fireflies blinking like scattered stars. "She was sick," he said. "We didn't know at first. Small things, fevers, bruises that didn't fade." He exhaled. "They said it was a rare condition, something genetic. There was a trial. I signed her up. I didn't care about the risks. I just wanted to fix her." His voice cracked, barely. "She died 6 weeks later." I closed my eyes. He continued. "Her mother, Cora, left me after that. Couldn't look at me, couldn't forgive me." "You were trying to save her," I said. He gave a bitter laugh. "That's what I told myself. But the truth is, I wanted to save myself from the guilt of doing nothing." I didn't speak. Not right away. Some grief didn't need comfort. It needed a witness. I reached out and took his hand. It was the first time we'd touched outside of a contract or obligation. His hand was cold, stiff, but he didn't pull away. We sat like that for a long time. Fireflies above, wet grass below, and a name, Elowen, hanging between us like a thread finally spoken aloud. Later that night, I found a bear sitting on my bed. Small, worn, missing one button eye. A note was tucked beneath its paw. She called this one Mr. Brave. I pressed the bear to my chest and held it like it could hold me back. Kale wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking to be seen. And I did. Would you have broken the rules too? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you're still watching Noraya's journey unfold, don't forget to like and subscribe now. The next morning, Kyle was already gone by the time I made it downstairs. The breakfast tray was untouched. But folded beneath my teacup was another note. East wing, top drawer, if you still want to know. I knew what he meant before I walked there. Inside the drawer, beneath a soft cream sweater, lay a file, bound in red string, labeled Eloin Arden, Trial B27, Farewell Labs. I sat down on the bed before opening it. Medical charts, genetic analysis, waivers, all signed. My eyes locked on one document, a consent form, Kyl's signature bold, his handwriting sharp. The treatment had risks, they knew, but Kyle had been desperate. There was a photo clipped to the top corner, Eloin holding a tiny stuffed giraffe. Kyle beside her, beard shorter, face younger, but tired. So tired. In the background, Cora Velen. She wasn't smiling. Her eyes looked somewhere far away. I stared at the picture until it blurred. That night I left the bear in the hallway, upright on a bench near the fireplace. With it I placed a folded sheet of music paper. No note, no explanation, but he would know. We weren't undoing the past, we were honoring it. Kyle found me in the kitchen later, sleeves rolled, my hands covered in flour. "You cook now?" he said softly. "Maybe I'm hungry." His lips curled, not a full smile but something close. He crossed to me and picked up a spoon. "Taste this." I took it. Let the sweet maple touch my tongue. "Too much cinnamon," I said. "That's how Eloin liked it." I paused. "Then it's perfect." We sat side by side on the counter as the muffins baked. A slow warmth grew between us, not romantic, not yet, but human, real. He looked at me, his tone softer than I'd ever heard it. "Do you regret marrying me?" The question caught me off guard. I thought of the contract, the secrets, the rules. I also thought of the garden, the fireflies, the music box. "No," I said. "But I regret how it began." He nodded. "Me too." Later, as we placed the muffins on a tray, I noticed his hand brushing mine. Not by accident, not forcefully, but intentionally. Kyle Arden didn't touch people, he was touching me, and for the first time I didn't flinch. I leaned against the counter and said quietly, "I'd like to learn more about her." He looked at me, eyes guarded but hopeful. "I'd like that too." The silence in the mansion changed. It wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't cold. It lingered like peace now. Slow, almost cautious. Kyle and I didn't talk much, but we didn't avoid each other either. He started joining me for breakfast. He never said good morning, but he'd pour my tea. I'd watch his fingers, strong, steady, as they circled the cup, always twice before placing it down. We fell into routines without saying we had. Reading together in the library, passing one another in the hallway with the slightest nod, and sometimes late at night, I'd hear the notes of a music box playing from the east wing. But he did. One afternoon I was folding laundry in the guest room when a letter slipped from one of Kyle's shirts. I froze. It wasn't addressed, just tucked inside the cuff like it had been hidden. Curiosity tugged at me. But I remembered the rule, don't touch what doesn't belong to you. Still I opened it. The handwriting was unfamiliar, soft loops, feminine. The top read, "Cora Velen, September 4th. I've decided not to fight anymore. I'll sign the agreement. I won't take you to court. I don't want anything from you, Kyle. Not money, not apologies. But don't pretend you did this for her. You did it for your name, for Farewell. I hope the guilt eats whatever pieces of your heart are still intact." I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the sleeve. For the first time, I saw Kyle not as the man who controlled every inch of this home, but the man who'd lost control when it mattered most. The next day, I searched the office while he was gone. I didn't mean to at first, but the air in that room always held something unspoken. The shelves were lined with medical journals, case files, and awards. One file caught my eye, B. Trial, Archive. Inside, thick documents, stamped confidential. Hospital invoices, legal forms, payout records, Attached was a birth certificate. Elowen Grace Arden, mother, Cora Vellon, father, Cale Arden. Beneath it a photo, Cale holding her. He looked terrified, proud, broken. There was another name scribbled at the bottom of a memo. Dr. Mallory Hastings, lead researcher. And then, a red inked post-it stuck to a payment ledger. Shut this down. Vellon's threat is real. I heard the front door slam shut. I barely had time to tuck the file back into place before Kyle's footsteps approached. Looking for something? He said from behind. I turned, heart hammering. He saw it in my face, the guilt, the curiosity, the betrayal. You read them. I had to, I said quietly. You never tell me anything. He stared for a long moment, then walked past me and sat at the edge of his desk. The day Elowen died, he said, they told me her heart failed, but what they didn't say was that the drug we gave her was still under review. I swallowed hard. She was a test, he said bitterly, a trial, and I let them use her. I stepped closer. You didn't know. He laughed, but it was hollow. I built Farewell. I funded that trial. I signed every approval. Kyle didn't look like a CEO anymore. He looked like a father still buried in grief. She was the only thing I loved, he said, and I killed her. I wanted to hate him at that moment. I wanted to scream, to ask how he could marry me under lies, how he could pretend this house was normal, how he could keep her room like a shrine and never mention her name. But all I said was, why me? He looked at me then, finally truly looked. Your uncle knew, he said. He had copies of those records. He found out about the trial and the cover-up. He threatened to expose everything. My heart dropped. You married me? To buy his silence? Kyle didn't answer. He didn't need to. I stepped back. All the warmth, the moments, the fireflies, the muffins, none of it changed the truth. I had been a transaction, a cover-up, I repeated under my breath. My stomach twisted, not with hate, not even with betrayal. It was the kind of ache that came from knowing, from finally seeing the whole picture and wishing you didn't. I thought back to the first time Kyle looked at me, that cold gaze, that clipped tone. He wasn't trying to impress me. He wasn't even trying to scare me. He had simply chosen me. Because it was convenient. Because I came with leverage. Because my uncle's addiction made it easy for me to claim. I stepped farther back, my body trembling with the weight of it all. I didn't want this, I said softly. Any of it. Kyle stood slowly. I know. Why didn't you just give him money? I did, he said. He kept coming back. Bigger demands. Bigger threats. At some point he wanted you involved. I blinked. He sold me? Kale's jaw clenched. I told him no. Again and again. Until he said he'd go public. Said he didn't care if Farewell burned. That's when I made a choice. I stared at him, my voice nearly cracking. You married me to shut him up. His silence was answer enough. But why keep me here? Why not just give me the ring, the contract, and let me live in another wing, another city? Why the Firefly Garden? The notes? The muffins? His voice dropped. Because I didn't expect you to matter. That hurt more than the silence. Kyle took a step closer. But you do. I turned away. It was too much. I didn't know whether to scream or cry, or just leave. I walked to the garden that night and sat under the pergola. The fireflies were slow to come. The breeze was cooler than usual. And still, he came. He stood at the edge of the path, hands in his pockets, watching me. I was going to shut down Farewell, he said, even before you found out. I didn't answer. He sat on the grass, not beside me but close enough. I've spent years pretending to be someone who didn't care, who didn't feel. You fooled me, I whispered. I fooled myself. He picked a small white bloom from the bush nearby, rolled the stem between his fingers, let it go. I know I have no right to ask anything from you, he said. He looked at me then. His voice was raw. But if there's anything left between us, if there's even a spark. I turned. KL, I'll earn the rest, he interrupted gently. But I need you to know, I'm done with secrets. I didn't stop him. I needed space, time, air. But one thing was clear. The Kyle I was married to wasn't the man I had begun falling for. The next morning, Kyle was gone before sunrise. His side of the bed looked untouched. The air still carried the faint trace of his cologne. Woody, clean, always distant. I stayed in bed longer than usual. My heart felt too full and too hollow at once. Everything he said the night before echoed in waves. The cover-up, the guilt, the admission that he didn't expect me to matter. And yet, I did. He said it out loud. But it didn't erase what came before. It didn't erase how we got here. I was still a pawn, traded, purchased, married in silence. Later that day, a courier dropped off a single manila envelope. On the front was my name, in Kyle's handwriting. Inside, in copies of my marriage contract now voided. The title deed to a beachfront property, $2 million transferred into an account under my name. A note. If you choose to walk away, everything in this envelope is yours. No strings, no guilt. If you choose to stay, I'll be waiting in the garden after dusk. I held the letter like it was on fire. Was this freedom or another test? I walked to the firefly garden as the sun dipped low. The trees cast long shadows. The grass shimmered with golden light. Kyle stood near the pond, his sleeves rolled, face unreadable. He turned as I stepped onto the stones. "You got the letter," he said. I nodded. I meant every word, he added. I didn't know how to fix this, but I could at least stop talking. I searched his face for signs of manipulation, but all I saw was exhaustion, genuine effort, and something softer. "I don't want your money," I said quietly, "or the house. You earned both." "No," I replied. "You can't buy redemption. You can only live it." His lips tightened. "So what do you want?" I walked closer. "To understand what happened with Cora." He nodded once. Slowly. "I met her at Hastings Biotech. She was brilliant, soft-spoken, fierce in labs. We fell hard and fast. When Elowen was born, she paused her career to raise her. I didn't. I poured everything into Farewell." His voice dipped. "One of our researchers, Mallory, pushed for a new pediatric drug, claimed it would cure rare heart defects. We were desperate. Elowen's condition was progressing. Cora didn't want the trial." He looked away. I signed off anyway. I closed my eyes. I thought I was saving her. Instead, "She died," I whispered. "She died." Silence. Then he continued. "Cora filed a claim. I tried to expose everything. My lawyers buried her in settlements. She got tired, left the country. I haven't seen her since. Why not just tell the truth? Because the truth would destroy lives, investors, employees, families whose kids were treated with the same protocol. And now, I don't care about any of them." He turned to me. "I care about you." That was the first time Kyle said those words. They didn't sound polished or prepared. They sounded real. Still, the wound was raw. "You cared after forcing me into your life?" "I cared when you smiled at my stupid notes." I almost laughed. "Almost. When you left the cupcake on my desk because I hadn't eaten. When you brought your mother's blanket down during the storm because you thought I hated thunder." He stepped closer. "I cared the first time you asked me if I was okay, and I didn't know how to answer." My eyes filled, because I remembered every one of those moments. And I had cared too, in spite of myself. In spite of the contract, the house, the secrets, I had begun to see Kyle, the man, not just the CEO, or the grieving father. He reached for my hand. I let him. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "I know. I'll shut it all down," he continued. "Farewell, my board, everything that allowed this to happen. But only if you want to be here." I looked down at our hands. "I'm not staying because I'm trapped," I said. He tensed. "I'm staying because I want to see who you are when you're not protecting your guilt." he exhaled. Then, for the first time since our wedding day, Kyle smiled. Not a smirk, not a business tactic, a real smile. It softened him, and softened me. Later that night, I lay in bed and reached for the music box he had fixed weeks ago. The melody played slowly, notes catching like whispers in the wind. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. But I held it to my chest and finally understood something. Grief doesn't end. But neither does love. The next morning the mansion felt different. Quieter, but not in the cold, hollow way it had before. Now it felt like breath had returned to its walls. No noise, not activity, just quiet with meaning. I found Kyle in the kitchen, barefoot, in dark sweats and a white shirt that clung slightly at the chest. He was chopping strawberries with military precision. "You cook now?" I asked, stepping into the light. He looked up, surprised, then amused. "I learned fast." I raised an eyebrow. I watched him for a moment. "Why the effort?" "Because you're still here," he answered simply. He set a plate in front of me and sat across the table without a word. The silence wasn't awkward this time. It was full of awareness, of choice. He'd given me the option to leave. I hadn't taken it. Now he was showing me that he saw that. "I've made a list," Kyle said after a beat. I blinked. "Of what?" "Everything I need to dismantle. Everything Farewell's name still touches. Charities, subsidiaries, board memberships. I'm walking away from all of it." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted. "I'm not asking you to fix me, Naraya. I'm showing you that I know I'm broken." His voice lowered. "And I'm trying." Later that day, I took a walk along the cliffs near the property. Wind swept through my curls, tugging at my sweater. I thought about Kyle's words, about the marriage that started without love, the rules, the East Wing, the contract that once bound me tighter than chains. Now the contract is gone. The door was open, so was Kyle. I returned to the mansion and passed through the East Wing again. This time, the light was on. The air didn't feel heavy. I walked back to the front entry, and there it was. Kyle had placed the bear, small, brown, with one button eye, inside a crystal case at the base of the staircase. A tiny plaque beneath it read, "Elowen Arden. Loved forever." Tears pressed at the corners of my eyes. Not just for Elowen, but for Kale. For me. For the strange road that led two broken people to a truth that had no easy answers. That night, Kyle knocked once before stepping into my room. He held something behind his back. "What's that?" I asked, lips twitching. He pulled out 2 steaming mugs. "Chamomile," he said. "No honey. Just the way you like it." I smiled, touched more than I expected to be. He handed me a mug, then sat on the edge of the armchair, cradling his own. "I want to build something real," he said. "Not a legacy, not a redemption arc, just something that doesn't need hiding." I looked at him, fingers wrapped around the warmth of the cup. "And you think that can start here?" "I think it already has." I didn't answer with words. I stood, I walked toward him, and kissed him. Not because I was supposed to. Not because it felt cinematic, but because it felt true. His lips were warm, steady. When we broke apart, he whispered, "So, you're staying?" I touched his jaw. "I'm choosing you." At that moment, I wasn't the girl trapped in a forced marriage. I was a woman reclaiming her choice. Kyle hadn't changed overnight, but I had. Because I no longer needed someone to tell me I mattered. I had proven that to myself. And in doing so, I had found someone who no longer needed to be perfect, just present. The news broke on a Wednesday, but it wasn't Kyle's face the media focused on, it was the documents. Files leaked anonymously to investigative journalists, complete with timestamps, trial logs, and payouts. The story hit national headlines within hours. Farewell Medical knowingly approved untested pediatric drugs. But the name of the whistleblower? Hidden. Because Kyle had made sure of that. He didn't go to the press with a speech. He didn't defend himself. He simply stepped down from every position tied to Farewell. He sold his remaining shares for pennies, then donated nearly all the proceeds, hundreds of millions, to a new trust fund, compensating families who lost children. There were no cameras at his doorstep, because Kyle Arden had already disappeared from public life. Now, he was just a man in a quiet house, planting lavender outside the East Wing. "Will you ever go back?" I asked one morning, watching him work in the soil. Kyle looked up, hands dirtied, sweat lining his temple. "No," he said. "That man died the day Elowen did." I stood beside him, basket in hand. Inside were lemons, fresh basil, and eggs. He glanced at it. "Muffins again? You asked for a second batch," I teased. "I asked for one," he smirked. "Not 6. I rolled my eyes, brushing flour from my cheek. Kyle wiped his hands on a towel, then leaned in and kissed my temple. "That's simple, that's intimate, that's new." This wasn't the same man who had once handed me a contract and told me never to ask questions. This was someone trying to build something honest from the ashes of everything he'd hidden. I was his partner. That evening we sat near the window, legs tangled beneath a knit blanket. I held a photo of Elowen. Kyle had added it to the mantel next to her bear. "She looks like you," I said. "She had Cora's laugh," he replied. He didn't flinch when he said her name. That mattered. "I reached out," Kyle said, "to Cora. Told her everything. Offered to go on record if she wanted justice." "What did she say?" "She said the past doesn't bring back a heartbeat." I nodded, silent. "But she also said," his voice softened, "she said she hopes I learned how to keep the people who are still alive." I reached for his hand. "You have." Later that week, we hosted our first dinner, just the two of us. No help, no staff. Just Kyle in an apron, chopping vegetables, and me laughing at his attempt to sear, not burn the salmon. I set the table. He lit candles. We sat across from each other, and halfway through dessert, I caught him staring. Kyle shook his head. "Nothing. Just, you're here." "Yes, you could have left 100 times. I stayed." He swallowed. "Do you forgive me?" The question hung between us. I placed my fork down. "Forgiveness is a process, Kale, not a single moment." He nodded slowly. "But I see you trying, and I see you changing." He reached across the table, fingers curling around mine. "That's enough," I added. His grip tightened, and in that flickering candlelight we kissed. It wasn't lust, it wasn't an escape, it was healing, soft, true, earned. The next morning the air in the mansion smelled like nutmeg and fresh paint. Kyle had been working quietly, restoring Elowen's playroom, not as a shrine but as a memory. No dust, no sheets, just light, soft pastels. Her favorite chair was repaired. The wall where she once scribbled is now framed, untouched. I stood at the doorway, watching as he carried in the last piece. The bear. The one I once found under her bed, missing an eye and stuffed with loose cotton. But now, Kyle had cleaned it, stitched the seams, and placed it in a crystal-clear case. At the bottom, engraved in silver, Elowen Arden, loved forever. He caught me staring. "Too much?" he asked. "No," I said. "It's perfect." He stood beside me, our shoulders brushing. "I used to think grief was a private thing," he murmured. "Something you lock up, deal with in the dark. But I see now. It needs space. Light. Grief doesn't shrink," I said gently. "We just grow around it." He turned to me, eyes glinting. "How are you so good with words?" "I'm not," I smiled. "I just lived through enough silence to know what needs to be said." We walked to the garden together that afternoon. It has become our routine, a slow stroll, a pause by the koi pond, his hand brushing mine. Our silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was full. Kyle knelt to adjust a lavender bush. "You're really getting into this whole gentle billionaire thing," I teased. He smirked. "Don't push it. I'm serious. Yesterday you were baking, today you're pruning. Next thing I know, you'll be journaling." He reached out and tugged lightly at a curl behind my ear. "Maybe I am," he said. Maybe I want to become someone I'd want my daughter to meet. I froze. That was the first time he referred to Elowen like that in the present tense, as if she were watching. Maybe she was. Maybe this garden, this life, this soft rebirth, it was all for her. For us. Later that night we danced. No music, no event. Kyle had come into the kitchen and pulled me close without a word. The lights dimmed, our breaths timed, one step, then another. He moved like he used to walk, calculated, careful, but this time, there was rhythm. I rested my head on his chest. His voice dropped to a whisper. When I lost her, I stopped believing in stars, in the mornings, in anything that didn't hurt. And now, I'm starting to think, maybe you weren't the punishment, maybe you were the answer. I looked up at him. He kissed me, slow, reverent, and in that kiss was everything we had survived. Not a perfect story, but a true one. If you believe people can change, really change, share this story. Let someone else hear Noraya's journey. The legal team was stunned. Farewell's board tried everything. Non-disclosure orders, private settlements, offers Kyle would have once entertained without blinking. But this time, he didn't even pick up the phone. He sent one statement through his lawyer. This company took from me. I am done taking from others. Within a week, the dismantling began. His name was removed from every file, plaque, and patent. Every lab with his funding was liquidated. Equipment donated to underfunded hospitals. Land sold off and profits transferred to the Farewell Victims Trust. I watched him from the garden balcony one morning as he signed the final deed. His posture didn't sag. He didn't smile either. He simply let go. And for Kyle Arden, that was bigger than any public speech. Later that afternoon, I found him in the old library. He'd pulled out a dusty box of journals. Not his, but Elowen's. Scribbled drawings, misspelled words, stars and clouds and butterflies. One of the pages read, "I want Daddy to come home today." He closed the book, eyes wet but steady. "I was never home," he said. "You are now." He looked up at me, like he wasn't sure he deserved those words, so I gave him more. I crossed the room and took his hand. Grief made you run, guilt made you hide, but love brought you back. That evening something unexpected happened. Kyle brought out a black velvet box. No, it wasn't a ring. Inside was a simple gold pendant. Engraved on the back were two names, Elowen, Noraya. I didn't answer with words. I placed the necklace around my neck and leaned in. Our foreheads touched. We stood still for a long time, two people bound by pain, but no longer ruled by it. That night, he held me in bed, not for warmth, not for comfort, but because we chose to be close. "I think I finally understand what love is," he murmured. "What? It's not fixing someone, or saving them. It's staying when the truth comes out." I traced my fingers along his jaw. "You stayed too." His hand found mine under the covers. "I didn't want a wife when I married you," he said. "I know, but now, I can't imagine home without you." The next morning, the house felt different, lighter. Not just because Farewell was gone, but because there were no more lies left to hide. No East Wing with secrets, no files to fear, no rules between us. Just two people, and a future still being written. A week after Farewell collapsed, we took a trip. Not far, just down the coast. A small cabin Kyle had once bought but never used. The place smelled of cedar and ocean salt. No staff, no marble floors, no echoes, just wind and peace. We didn't talk about the past there. We walked barefoot on wet sand. He read books out loud to me. I taught him how to make proper jollof rice. He burned the first batch, ate it anyway. At night we sat on the porch and watched stars in silence. He reached for my hand under a fleece blanket and whispered, "I would have lost myself if I hadn't lost everything first." I looked over. "You didn't lose me," I said. His eyes held mine. "No, I found you, One morning I found him in the living room, phone in hand. He'd received a letter from one of the Farewell families, a mother who lost her son. The message was short. I don't forgive what happened, but I thank you for not hiding. My son mattered. You made sure of that. Kyle read it twice, then handed it to me. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just stepped outside, sat on the ground, and stared into the ocean. I joined him. His head rested on my lap. For the first time in years, he let someone else carry the silence with him. The next day, before we left the cabin, Kyle pulled out a notepad. Write something, he said. Why? Because someday I want our daughter, or son, to know where this love came from. Not how it started, but how we stayed. My breath caught. He wasn't proposing. There was no ring, but there was a future, spoken gently. So I picked up the pen and wrote the first sentence. It didn't begin with love, but it grew from pain, and it stayed because we chose to stay. If you believe healing is messy but worth it, share Noraya's story. Drop a comment below if you believe in second chances. Peace didn't knock. It drifted in, quiet, unsure, like sunlight after long rain. The mansion once felt like a cage, cold marble, shuttered wings, footsteps echoing over silence. But now, it felt like home. Kyle opened the windows every morning. No more security codes or locked doors. He moved with ease, no longer a man carrying secrets like shackles. I started painting again. Simple strokes, nothing profound. Flowers, fingers dipped in blue. We didn't speak of farewell, not because we were avoiding it, but because we had already buried it. Instead, Kyle spoke of selling the rest of his empire. I don't want to be the man who owns everything but understands nothing, he told me one night. He wasn't looking for applause. He was just ready to live differently. To live with someone. He began drawing up plans. Some days it was an architecture school for orphaned teens. Other days it was a children's rehabilitation fund under Elowen's name. I didn't ask him to. He just did it, and he did it all quietly. His shoulders lowered. And for the first time since I met him, Kyle Arden smiled without guilt sitting behind his eyes. One afternoon, I found him in the garden, pruning herbs he could barely name. Thinking about retiring from business entirely, I teased. He shrugged. I've built enough. Now I want to build it right. Then he glanced up at me. And I want to build it with you. He walked over, earthy hands wiping on a towel. I want to grow something that isn't about power or revenge, he said, but something slow, real, honest. My heart thudded in my chest. I didn't answer with words. I kissed him. That night, we danced again, but this time, it was on purpose. He'd set up soft lights in the garden. Music played from a small speaker. A few candles flickered against the twilight. Kyle wore no suit. I wore no makeup. Bare feet, bare hearts. Our arms wrapped around each other like they always should have. No lead, no follow. Just us. And under the stars, Kyle whispered. I never knew silence could be this full. What would you have done in Noraya's shoes? Would you have stayed? Would you have forgiven? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Weeks passed. No more contracts. No more rules. No more locked wings or secrets. But even as freedom settled in, I kept asking myself, why am I still here? Not because Kyle was unkind, not because I didn't care, but because I needed to be sure I wasn't staying out of habit, or obligation, or pity for the man who used to be more shadow than soul. So I left, just for a few days. I packed a small bag, kissed his cheek, and said, I need to feel who I am without this house around me. Kyle didn't flinch. He nodded. I'll be right here. I returned to the town I'd once tried so hard to escape. My old neighborhood, cracked sidewalks, loud aunties, familiar markets, and the tiny apartment where Mama had laughed, even when the refrigerator hummed louder than our bellies. Mama was gone now, but her spirit was everywhere. I visited her favorite church, lit a candle, whispered a prayer she used to say, "Lord, give me strength to choose, not settle." That's when I knew. I wasn't settling. I was choosing. Choosing him. Not because of what he gave me, but because of how he made me feel when I gave him my heart, and he didn't drop it. I returned to the mansion on a Saturday morning. Kyle was in the kitchen, flour on his shirt, hair messier than usual. He looked up like he'd been waiting forever, even though it had only been 3 days. Before he could speak, I said, "Yes." He blinked. "Yes what?" "Yes to staying, yes to you, yes to us." He wiped his hands and stepped forward. His arms wrapped around me. Tight, safe, no tension, no negotiation, just warmth, just home. That evening he brought out a surprise, not a gift, but a key. "This is to the black file drawer," he said. "The one I wasn't allowed to touch?" He nodded. "I don't want there to be anything between us anymore." I took it, opened the drawer. Inside wasn't what I expected. No dirt, no legal threats, no secrets about my family. I opened it slowly. If you're reading this, I finally learned that trust isn't earned through control, but through truth. Below it was a journal, empty pages, a pen tucked inside. "Write our story," he said. "Not how it began, but how it keeps going." I hugged the journal to my chest and nodded. For the first time in my life, love didn't feel like a transaction. It felt like freedom. Some scars don't fade, they soften, they settle into your story, but they don't disappear, and Kyle carried more than most. A month after I returned, we hosted a dinner. Not a grand event, just a small meal. 3 guests, all survivors of Farrell's drug trial. One had permanent nerve damage, another had lost her sight in one eye. The third, a man with shaking hands, clutched his glass with quiet effort. Kale served the food himself. He didn't hide behind lawyers or handlers. He listened. He looked each one in the eye and said the words no CEO had ever said to them before. "I'm sorry. I was a part of your pain. I'll never ask for your forgiveness, but I'll spend the rest of my life honoring what was lost." Tears welled in the woman's eyes. She stood, walked to him, and placed her hand on his chest. "You're not who you were," she whispered. Kyle nodded. "Neither are you." That night, I lay beside him and asked the question that had haunted me for months. "Why me?" He turned toward me in the dark. "Because you were the first person I couldn't buy, the first person who saw through the cold. You didn't ask for anything, Noraya, and somehow, you gave me everything." His voice cracked. "You were never a prisoner. I was." Silence followed, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was full of understanding. Weeks turned into seasons. We traveled. Not to fancy places, but to cities where people needed help. KL funded women's shelters. I taught workshops for girls learning to write and speak with confidence. We didn't make headlines. We made an impact. Quietly, purposefully, and every morning Kyle would kiss my forehead before I even opened my eyes and whisper, "You're still the only choice I've never regretted." One chilly morning, I stood in the Firefly Garden, the same place where we'd once touched hands for the first time. Now, Kyle stood behind me, arms wrapped around my waist. "Eloine's tree is blooming," I said. "She'd be 10 this year." He kissed my shoulder. "I think she would have liked you." I smiled. "She probably would have bossed me around." Kyle chuckled. "Like her father." I turned around, cupped his face. "No. Her father finally learned to let go. That's not a weakness. That's strength." He kissed me. It wasn't a first kiss. It was a forever kiss. I still don't know what made me stay that first night after the wedding. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was survival. It built itself in quiet dinners, in forgiven mistakes, in words spoken without defenses. I was forced into a marriage, but I chose to turn it into a life. Some truths cut deep, but silence can bury you alive. Kale used to live inside silence like it was armor, but now, every quiet moment between us felt like a seed, something alive, something growing, and finally it bloomed. We spent spring rebuilding, not the house, ourselves. Kyle stepped down from every board he once ruled. He let go of every position that fed his ego but starved his peace. Instead, he started smaller. He hired a team to open the Alone Foundation, a non-profit providing healthcare to children impacted by unethical trials. He didn't name himself as the founder, didn't put his face on anything. Real accountability, he told me, doesn't need applause. I began journaling. At first it was just a few notes. Then paragraphs. Then pages. Sometimes I wrote about Kyle's changes. Other times I wrote letters to the girl I used to be. The girl who once stood in a cream dress, traded like she was nothing more than a favor owed. That girl didn't vanish. She evolved. And I kept writing, not for closure, but for clarity, because I didn't just want to survive the story. I wanted to own it. One evening I found Kyle asleep on the couch, a book half finished on his chest. The fireplace is low and steady. I watched him for a moment. Not the billionaire, not the cold CEO, just the man who learned how to love late, but loved everything once he did. I walked over, placed a blanket on him, then sat nearby, heart full, thoughts quiet, and I whispered, "You're worth the risk." A few days later, Kyle and I walked by the shore near my hometown, the same beach where I used to stare out and wonder if life had anything more to offer. This time, I wasn't wondering. I was grateful. "I've been thinking," he said, brushing sand from his shoes. "Dangerous," I teased. He smiled. "I want to renew our vows." I blinked. "Vows?" He stopped walking. "Not the ones from that wedding. Not the ones forced by a contract or desperation. I want new ones. Real ones." My chest tightened. Kyle reached into his pocket, not with a ring but with a folded piece of paper. He opened it. His voice shook slightly, but he kept reading. "I vow to see you, not as what you were forced to become, but as who you've chosen to be. I vow not to own you but to honor you. I vow to never let silence speak louder than my love again." I didn't cry. I held his face in my hands, and I kissed him like we were starting over. Because we were. That night, in the garden where fireflies once lit our first quiet bond, we sat side by side. No music, no crowd, no distractions. Kyle reached over, rested his hand on my stomach. I froze, then smiled. "Too soon to tell," I whispered. He leaned close. "Even if it's not, I already feel like I've been reborn." Final thoughts? No one dreams of being forced into marriage. No girl draws pictures of contracts or courtroom threats. But life doesn't always hand you love wrapped in silk. Sometimes it hands you fear, silence, and secrets, and asks you to decide what kind of woman you'll become through it. I was quiet once, but I'm not quiet anymore. Kyle bought my silence, but I gave him my voice. And together, we found a beginning neither of us expected, but both of us chose. What would you have done in Noraya's shoes? Share your thoughts below, and if you believe healing is possible after pain, hit like, share this video, and subscribe. Someone out there needs to hear this today.